What happens when a billionaire's love letter to his mistress goes viral? At 3:15 p.m. on a Tuesday, the world saw tech mogul Sebastian Sterling's post, a sun-drenched photo of him with influencer Kaylin Vance on a yacht in Miami. The caption, "A simple, devastating dagger, my queen." But the real story, the one that shattered the internet and a billion-dollar empire, came 3 hours later. From the silent, dignified shadows, his pregnant wife, Dr. Aris Thorne, who had been publicly invisible for months, uploaded a single grainy image. It wasn't a selfie or a cryptic quote. It was a black-and-white ultrasound, clear as day, showing the tiny, perfect heartbeat of their unborn child. And her caption, "A promise, a threat, and a declaration of war all in one, your legacy." This isn't just a story of infidelity. It's the story of how a woman, pushed to the edge, used a single photo to remind her powerful husband and the entire world what he was truly about to lose. The air in the Sterling penthouse was always the same, a precisely climate-controlled 72 degrees, scented with a bespoke blend of white tea and neroli that cost more per ounce than most people's groceries. It was an atmosphere of serene, untouchable wealth, a silence bought and paid for, 50 stories above the ceaseless hum of New York City. From this vantage point, looking out over the geometric sprawl of Central Park, Dr. Aris Thorne often felt less like a resident and more like a curator of a very expensive, very lonely museum. Her husband, Sebastian "Seb" Sterling, was the museum's prized acquisition. To the world, he was the visionary founder and CEO of Elysian Dynamics, the tech wunderkind whose work in advanced robotics and AI was changing the future. His face a handsome and confident arrangement of sharp angles and an easy smile, was a regular on the covers of Forbes and Wired. He was a man who moved with the gravitational pull of his own success, drawing people, deals, and headlines into his orbit. To Aris, he was the man who 7 years ago had stumbled into her doctoral defense presentation on Florentine art, thinking it was a lecture on fluid dynamics. He'd stayed for the entire 2 hours, utterly captivated, not by the art, but by the quiet, passionate intelligence with which she spoke. He'd pursued her with a single-minded focus that she would later recognize as the same energy he applied to a hostile takeover. He'd charmed her, not with his money, but with his curiosity, his seeming fascination with her world, so different from his own. He loved that she couldn't care less about Series B funding or IPOs. He called her his touchstone, his calm in the chaos. But over the years, the chaos had begun to win. The higher his star ascended, the more he became a product meticulously managed and publicly consumed. The quiet dinners were replaced by charity galas. The lazy Sundays in bed were usurped by emergency conference calls to Tokyo or Berlin. He still looked at her with what resembled adoration, but his eyes were often distant, his mind already 3 steps ahead, calculating the next move on a board she was no longer invited to see. Their struggle to conceive had been a quiet, private battlefield for the last 4 years. It was a landscape of sterile clinics, hushed conversations, and the sharp, metallic taste of disappointment that seemed to coat every month. Seb had been publicly supportive, squeezing her hand during appointments, but Aris could feel his frustration mounting, a subtle impatience that was for a man like Seb, a form of corrosion. He saw it as a problem that couldn't be solved with an algorithm or a checkbook, a rare failure in his otherwise immaculately successful life. When she had finally miraculously become pregnant 3 months ago, his joy had felt volcanic, almost desperate. "My legacy," he had whispered, his hand splayed on her still flat stomach, his eyes alight with a possessive fire she hadn't seen in years. Finally, something real, something that lasts. For a fleeting moment, the old Seb was back. He'd cut back his travel-delegated meetings and even sat through a birthing class on Zoom, his expression a comical mix of terror and fascination. Aris had allowed herself to hope to believe that this baby, their legacy, would be the anchor that brought him back to their shared shore. The cracks, however, remained. They were hairline fractures, visible only to her. The way he angled his phone away from her, a new habit for a man who once left his devices scattered carelessly around the apartment. The late-night coding sessions that were never reflected in the next day's company updates. And then there was Kaylin Vance. Aris had first seen her name in the society pages, a social media influencer with an unnerving talent for being in the right place at the right time, always photographed just over the shoulder of someone more important. Kaylin was everything Aris was not: loud, overtly sexy, and terminally online. Her life was a curated feed of luxury, a performance of effortless glamour that required relentless, exhausting effort. Aris, a woman who valued privacy and substance, found her nauseating. She noticed Seb's passing mentions of her. Elysian is doing a small campaign with some influencers. Vance is one of them. Apparently she has a huge reach with the Gen Z demographic. It sounded plausible, logical. But then came the likes on Kaylin's sultry Instagram posts, the late-night DMs Aris glimpsed over his shoulder before he snapped the phone shut. When she gently questioned him, he'd deployed his most effective weapon, gaslighting delivered with a charming, disarming smile. "Honey, you're pregnant. Your hormones are all over the place," he'd said, stroking her hair. "It's work, nothing more. Do you really think I have time for that kind of nonsense? You and this baby." He'd kissed her forehead. "You're my entire world." And because she wanted to believe him, because the alternative was a chasm she wasn't ready to face, she had let it go. The trip to Art Basel Miami Beach was supposed to be their baby moon, a final luxurious escape before their lives were irrevocably changed. It was Aris's world, a place where she could shine. She was scheduled to participate in a panel discussion on the intersection of classical art and digital ownership. For the first time in a long time, she would not be just Seb Sterling's wife. She would be Dr. Aris Thorne. Seb had been enthusiastic. "It's perfect. We'll celebrate. Buy something incredible for the nursery. You can do your art thing. I'll do some networking. It'll be just like old times." And they flew down on the private jet, the cabin a sterile cocoon of cream leather and polished mahogany. Seb was attentive, plying her with sparkling water and ensuring her seat was perfectly reclined. But his thumbs were a blur across his phone screen. A secret conversation played out in a language she couldn't read. The smile he gave her felt like a mask stretched taut over a hidden reality. The first day in Miami was a whirlwind of sensory overload. The humid, salt-laced air, the pastel-hued Art Deco buildings of South Beach, the thrum of excitement that pulsed through the city during the art fair. They checked into their suite at the Faena Hotel, a palace of decadent red and gold with a balcony that offered a panoramic view of the turquoise Atlantic. "Isn't this amazing?" Seb said, wrapping his arms around her from behind as she looked out at the ocean. His chin rested on her shoulder, but she could feel the vibration of his phone against her back, a persistent, silent tapping that felt like a behrayal in Morse code. That evening at a VIP preview party at the Miami Beach Convention Center, the fractures in their gilded cage began to show. The space was cavernous, filled with a cacophony of languages and the clinking of champagne flutes. $1 billion paintings hung on temporary walls, and the crowd was a thick stew of artists, collectors, celebrities, and the obscenely wealthy. Aris was in her element, discussing the nuances of a Gerhard Richter piece with a gallery owner from Berlin when she saw him. Seb was across the hall, deep in conversation. But it wasn't a hedge fund manager or a rival tech CEO he was talking to. It was Kaylin Vance. Kaylin was wearing a dress that seemed to be made of liquid silver, clinging to her surgically perfected curves. Her laughter was loud, a siren's call designed to draw every eye in the room. Seb was leaning in close, his body language intimate, his hand resting for a moment too long on the small of her back. He wasn't networking. He was captivated. Aris felt a cold dread wash over her, a physical sensation that started in her gut and spread through her limbs, leaving her feeling icy and numb despite the humid Miami heat. She turned away, her heart hammering against her ribs. She took a steadying breath, reminding herself of what he'd said. It's work. Nothing more. She was Dr. Aris Thorne. She was above petty jealousy. She would not make a scene. She would trust her husband. Later that night, back in the opulent silence of their hotel suite, he claimed he was just locking down the final details of the influencer campaign. He was breezy dismissive, already unbuttoning his shirt and talking about an early morning meeting. He didn't notice the way she watched him. Her art historian's eye now trained on him, analyzing every detail, every tell, every brushstroke of the lie he was painting. The next morning he was gone before she woke up, leaving a note on the pillow. My love had to rush out. A potential investor flew in just for the morning. Go enjoy the sun. I'll make it up to you this afternoon, I promise. We'll have the best dinner. I love you. Seb Aris sat on the edge of the bed, the crisp hotel stationery feeling flimsy in her hands. The lie was so smooth, so practiced. She walked out onto the balcony, the morning sun glinting off the vast, indifferent ocean. She knew, with a certainty that felt as solid and cold as a block of marble, she knew. He wasn't with an investor. She spent the day in a daze, a ghost haunting her own vacation. She skipped her panel discussion, sending a polite but firm email, citing a personal emergency. She couldn't stand the thought of facing a crowd of pretending that her world wasn't tilting on its axis. She walked along the beach, the sand warm beneath her feet, the sound of the waves a relentless roar. She thought of the tiny life inside her, a secret anchor in the storm. She thought of the man she had loved, the man who had been replaced by this polished, duplicitous stranger. Around 3:00 p.m. she was sitting in a cabana by the pool, nursing a bottle of water and scrolling numbly through her phone when a notification popped up. It was from Instagram. @Seb Sterling just posted a photo. Her finger hovered over the notification, a strange sense of premonition holding her back. She felt like an archaeologist about to open a tomb, knowing that the air inside would be toxic, that the contents would change everything. She tapped the screen, and the world ended. The image that filled Aris's screen was a masterpiece of curated infidelity. It wasn't a grainy, stolen shot from a paparazzo. It was a high-resolution, professionally lit photograph, composed with the deliberate artistry of a luxury brand campaign. Seb and Kaylin Vance were on the deck of a sleek, impossibly white yacht, the kind that rents for $100,000 a day. The Miami skyline was a hazy, picturesque backdrop. Seb was at the helm, laughing, his hand resting on the polished chrome wheel. He was wearing white linen pants and a navy blue polo shirt, the picture of casual masculine power. His gaze, however, wasn't on the water or the camera. It was fixed with an expression of unguarded adoration on Kaelin. Kaelin was positioned slightly in front of him, leaning back against his chest. She was wearing a string bikini in a shade of eye-searing magenta, her tanned body glistening. One hand was draped possessively over his forearm. Her long, manicured nails painted a matching shade of pink. Her head was thrown back in laughter, her face tilted towards his, their lips just inches apart. The sun caught the highlights in her blonde hair, creating a halo effect. She looked radiant, triumphant, and utterly in control. It was a portrait of stolen intimacy, made public for millions to see. But the image alone, as devastating as it was not the kill shot. The kill shot was the caption. 5 words, 23 characters. My queen. My everything. The words hung in the digital space, stark and brutal. My queen. The pet name he had once used for Iris in the early, heady days of their love. He had whispered it into her ear on their wedding day, his voice thick with emotion. Now here it was, repurposed, cheapened, and bestowed upon this woman in a bikini on his public Instagram feed, a feed followed by 12.7 million people. For a long moment, Iris couldn't breathe. The air in the cabana, thick with the scent of salt water and chlorine, felt thin and useless. The cheerful pop music wafting from the pool speakers sounded distorted and menacing. A physical shockwave moved through her, starting from the pit of her stomach and radiating outwards, leaving her hands trembling and her vision blurred. It was a violent, cellular-level recognition of betrayal. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a hack. It was a declaration. Her first instinct was a primal scream, a raw, guttural sound of pure agony that she physically choked back down her throat. She gripped the phone so tightly she was sure the screen would crack. Her analytical mind, the mind that could deconstruct a Renaissance painting layer by layer, kicked into overdrive, trying to process the data points. The yacht, the professional quality, the timing mid-afternoon on a Tuesday peak engagement hours. This wasn't a spontaneous love-struck post. This was a calculated media launch, a strategic move. He was in effect divorcing her in the most public, humiliating way imaginable. He wasn't just leaving her, he was replacing her, and he wanted the world to witness the coronation of his new queen. Her thumb, acting of its own accord, tapped on Kaelin's tagged profile. It was already a firestorm. Kaelin had reposted Seb's picture to her own story with the caption, "Finally free to love you out loud, Seb Sterling." Her feed was a perfectly crafted narrative leading up to this moment. Cryptic posts about a new love stories, showing glimpses of a man's watch, Seb's custom, Patek Philippe, and champagne glasses on a private jet. She had been seeding this reveal for weeks, building an audience for Iris's public execution. Then came the comments, a tsunami of them crashing onto Seb's post. "OMG, I knew it," from one of Kaelin's followers. "Wait, isn't he married? And isn't his wife pregnant?" from a shocked observer. "This is so messy. I'm here for it." At Kaelin Vance, you are a queen. Upgrade at Draris Thorn Thoughts and Prayers, honey. You deserve better. Cold-blooded. The wife is a classy, intelligent woman. This is just trashy. The internet had already chosen its sides, drawing battle lines in the comments section. Iris was being dissected by strangers, her private pain becoming public entertainment. She was a hashtag, a trending topic, a pitiable character in a drama she hadn't known she was starring in. The humiliation was a physical entity, a hot, suffocating blanket. She felt a desperate urge to vomit. Her phone began to buzz incessantly. The screen lit up with calls and a flood of texts. Her mother, her sister, her best friend, Chloe, who was a litigator in London, her agent, the head of the board of the museum where she consulted. They had all seen it. The digital guillotine had fallen, and the whole world was watching her head roll. She declined every call, switching her phone to silent. She couldn't speak. What would she say? Yes, the father of my unborn child has just announced his affair on Instagram. Yes, he called her the name he used to call me. Yes, I am sitting by a pool in Miami while my life implodes. She stumbled out of the cabana, her legs unsteady. She needed to get back to the suite. She needed walls. She needed silence. She walked through the pool area, her face a pale, emotionless mask. She could feel the eyes of strangers on her. Had someone recognized her? Did they know they were feet away from the woman at the center of the internet's biggest soap opera? Every glance felt like a new wound. Back in the cold, opulent suite, the silence was even louder. Seb's things were still there. His toiletries on the marble vanity. A copy of the Wall Street Journal on the bedside table. His promise, written on hotel stationery, now felt like a cruel joke. I'll make it up to you this afternoon. Was this it? Was this his idea of making it up to her by burning her life down for a public spectacle? She walked to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked down at the beach. The waves crashed and receded oblivious. The sun continued to shine. The world hadn't stopped. It had just rearranged itself, leaving her on the outside of her own life. The rage came then, cold and pure. It was a different emotion from the initial hot shock. This was a deep, glacial anger. It wasn't the fury of a spurned lover. It was the fury of a queen who had been unceremoniously deposed by a court jester. He had underestimated her. He had mistaken her quiet nature for weakness, her dignity for passivity. He thought he could discard her like a piece of outdated technology, an old model being phased out for a newer, shinier one. He had called the baby his legacy. He had co-opted her body, her pregnancy, into his narrative of dynastic succession. And now he thought he could just walk away from it all, from her, from this child, with a single Instagram post, as if he were just rebranding a company. She looked at her reflection in the dark glass of the window. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, with a pain so profound it felt ancient. But beneath the pain, a new resolve was hardening. He wanted a public war. He wanted to communicate through social media. Fine. He had fired the first shot with a yacht and a bottle blonde. She would return fire with something far more powerful. Something real. Something he couldn't control or spin. She picked up her phone, her hands no longer shaking. They were steady, purposeful. She ignored the hundreds of notifications and opened her own Instagram account. @Doreris_Thorn. It was a quiet, dignified page. Photos of art architecture, her research. It had a respectable 50,000 followers. Academics, artists, students. Nothing compared to his millions or Kaylin's garish empire. But she didn't need millions of followers. She only needed one message to reach the right audience. She scrolled back through her camera roll past photos from their happier times. A trip to Kyoto. A snowy Christmas in Vermont. Images that now felt like relics from another life. She went back 3 weeks to her last obstetrician's appointment. The doctor, knowing her background in art history, had printed a particularly clear image from the ultrasound for her. A little masterpiece for your collection Dr. Thorne," she had said kindly. Aris had framed it and put it on her bedside table, a private joy. Now it was going to be her weapon. She took a photo of the ultrasound print. The image was grainy black and white, clinical yet miraculous. The unmistakable shape of a fetus, its tiny spine curved its heart, a flicker of white light. A life, a fact, an undeniable truth in a world of curated lies. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, typing out a caption. She didn't tag him. She didn't use hashtags. She didn't engage with the sordid drama he had created. She rose above it, aiming for a target he hadn't even considered. She wasn't speaking to the gossip blogs or the reality TV fans. She was speaking to his board of directors, his investors, the old money families whose respect he craved, and to any lingering shred of his conscience. She took one last look at the ultrasound photo, at the tiny, innocent life at the center of this hurricane. A fierce, protective love surged through her, extinguishing the last remnants of her fear. She pressed share. The post went live at 6 to 17 p.m. A single black and white image on her quiet, tasteful feed, and a caption that was a whisper, a promise, and a threat, all in 2 devastating words. Your legacy. And then she turned off her phone, plunging the digital world into a silence of her own making. The war had begun. The silence in the Faena suite was no longer empty. It was charged a vacuum waiting for the inevitable sonic boom. Aris didn't cry. She didn't pace. She moved with the calm, deliberate precision of a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. The initial searing pain had cauterized into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. He had mistaken her for a damsel in a tower. He was about to find out she owned the tower, and she had just set the demolition charges. For 2 hours, she sat in the quiet, allowing the digital world to do its work. Her post wasn't a scream into the void. It was a perfectly timed, perfectly aimed sniper shot. While Seb and Kaylin's post was loud, tacky, and emotionally volatile, hers was the opposite, silent, profound, and unimpeachably dignified. It didn't engage with their narrative. It completely changed the story. It elevated the conflict from a trashy celebrity affair to a Greek tragedy about family betrayal and inheritance. She knew Seb. She knew his vanities, his insecurities. He hadn't just built a company, he'd built a myth. The Seb Sterling myth was that of the self-made genius who was also a family man, a stable force in a volatile market. He used his marriage to Aris with her old-world grace and intellectual bona fides as a shield and a status symbol. It signaled to the conservative old money investors he so desperately courted that he was more than just a flash-in-the-pan tech bro. He was dynasty material. Her post, with its stark, powerful simplicity, took a sledgehammer to that myth. Your legacy was a masterstroke of ambiguity. On the surface, it was the poignant cry of a heartbroken mother. But to the people who mattered the board of Elysian Dynamics, the shareholders, the patriarchal titans of industry, Seb idolized, it read as a threat. This child is the heir to the Sterling Empire, and you, its father, are publicly behaving like a reckless boy. This legacy is now in the hands of the woman you just tried to humiliate. At precisely 8:30 p.m., Aris turned her phone back on. It was an avalanche. Texts, missed calls, emails, and thousands upon thousands of notifications. But she ignored the noise. She was looking for specific signals. The first signal came from her best friend, Chloe. The text was short and sharp. War room assembled. Awaiting your orders. General. Chloe wasn't just a friend. She was a partner at a top London law firm specializing in high-stakes international divorces. Her involvement meant the cavalry was already on its way. The second signal was an email from a name that made Aris's breath catch: Harrison Thorne, her father. Chairman of a multi-generational merchant bank, Harrison was a man who communicated in actions, not words. He despised Seb, viewing him as a vulgar upstart who had married his daughter as an acquisition. He had been civil for Aris's sake, but he had been waiting for Seb to slip up. The email was 5 words long. The Sterling account is frozen. Aris knew what this meant. Her father held a significant private line of credit for Seb that he had used for discreet ventures investments and expenses he didn't want on the Elysian Dynamics books. It was a financial leash, and her father had just yanked it. Hard. The third and most telling signal was a series of missed calls from a number she knew by heart. Marcus Thorne, her older brother. Marcus sat on the board of Elysian Dynamics. It had been a condition of the Thorne family's initial crucial investment in the company years ago. His presence was a quiet check on Seb's power. His calls meant the board was in panic mode. The public reaction was just as she'd anticipated. The narrative had shifted entirely. Comments on Seb's post were now overwhelmingly negative. Where there had been mockery, there was now sympathy for Aris. Where there had been praise for Kaelin, there was now condemnation. He posted about his new girl. She posted about his child. Level up. The classiest clapback in history. She didn't even mention him. She didn't have to. Your legacy. That's not a caption, that's a checkmate. Kaelin Vance looks like a fool right now, trying to be a queen when the real queen is moving in silence. News outlets which had initially reported on the affair with salacious glee were now reframing the story. Forbes ran a headline, "Sterling's legacy in question," after public meltdown. Bloomberg was more direct. Elysian Dynamics stock dips as CEO's personal crisis goes nuclear. Aris allowed herself a small, grim smile. She had turned their sympathy into power. She was no longer the victim. She was the strategist. She finally answered a call, not from her frantic family, but from the concierge at the Faena. "Dr. Thorne." The voice was hushed, respectful. "I'm so sorry to disturb you. Mr. Sterling is in the lobby. He is insistent that he be allowed up." Aris looked around the suite at the remnants of her shared life with Seb. "Please inform Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice as cool and calm as the marble floor, "that his access to this suite has been revoked. His belongings will be sent to his office tomorrow. If he does not leave the premises, I will have him removed for trespassing." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Of course, Dr. Thorne. Immediately." She hung up and finally called her brother, Marcus. "Aris." "Thank God. Are you all right?" His voice was a lifeline of familiar, steady concern. "I'm fine, Marcus. Better than fine. What's the situation?" "A complete meltdown," he said, his voice tight with a mixture of anger and grim satisfaction. "The board is apoplectic. Our stock is down 9% in after-hours trading. Our chief counsel is having a stroke. Seb's phone is off. He's gone completely dark since your post. What in God's name was he thinking?" "He wasn't thinking," Aris said calmly. "He was emoting, and he was doing it with a 20-something who thinks a hashtag is a corporate strategy. He wanted to humiliate me. He thought I would crumble." "He thought wrong," Marcus said, a note of pride in his voice. "Dad is... well, he's Dad. He's already called an emergency meeting of the Thorne Group. The word is out. Sebastian Sterling is persona non grata. Good, Aris said. Now listen to me very carefully. I need you to do something. At the next board meeting, I want you to invoke Article 7, Section B of the Corporate Bylaws. There was a sharp intake of breath on Marcus's end. Aris, you can't be serious. The morality clause, it's never been used. It's a nuke. His post wasn't just immoral, Marcus. It was financially reckless. It has directly harmed the company's reputation and valuation. That is a clear breach of his fiduciary duty as CEO. I want a vote of no confidence. I want him suspended pending an internal investigation. He'll fight it. He holds the majority of voting shares. Does he? Aris asked, a chill in her voice. Check the prenuptial agreement. The one his hotshot lawyers drafted and my country bumpkin lawyer, as he called him, reviewed. Check the addendum regarding reputational damage and the associated transfer of voting rights from his personal holdings to the Thorn Trust. Silence. Then a low whistle from Marcus. You didn't. Aris, you absolute genius. He signed that he gave you power over his voting shares if he embarrassed you publicly. He was so arrogant. Aris whispered the memory sharp and bitter. So confident I would never, ever leave him. He barely read the addendum. He just saw it as another piece of paper to keep my father happy. He never imagined I would actually use it. He didn't just underestimate you, Aris. He committed suicide and handed you the gun, Marcus said, his voice buzzing with energy. Consider it done. We'll convene an emergency session tomorrow at 9 a.m. By noon, he'll be CEO in name only. After the call, Aris made one more. This one was to a private aviation charter. Within the hour, a sleek black car was waiting for her at a discreet service entrance of the hotel. She left with nothing but her purse and a small carry-on bag, leaving the wreckage of her marriage behind in the silent, opulent suite. She wasn't flying back to the empty penthouse in New York. That was his territory. She was flying to the one place that had always been hers, the Thorn family estate in the Hudson Valley. It was a fortress of old money, quiet power, and unwavering loyalty. It was where she would plan the rest of the war. As the car sped towards the executive airport, she finally allowed herself to look at her phone again. A single desperate text from Seb had managed to get through before she blocked his number. Aris, please. Talk to me. What have you done? She stared at the message, a relic from a man who still didn't understand the game he was playing. He thought she had just posted a picture. He had no idea she had just seized his kingdom. She typed a one-word reply, then blocked him for good. Legacy. Sebastian Sterling felt the ground disappear from beneath his feet in stages. The first tremor was the look on the Faena Hotel manager's face, a mixture of pity and terror, as he politely informed Seb that he was barred from his own suite. The second was the cold, final text from Aris. The third and most seismic was the call he received at 9:05 a.m. the next morning from Elysian Dynamics' frantic chief legal counsel. They're invoking the morality clause, Seb. The board is voting to suspend you. Seb, who had spent a sleepless night in a sterile room at the Mandarin Oriental that Kalen had booked, felt a surge of defiant laughter. They can't. It's my company. I am the board. Not anymore, the lawyer said, his voice strained. Marcus Thorn is claiming the Thorn Trust now controls your personal voting shares, something about a prenup addendum. Seb, what the hell did you sign? The memory hit him like a physical blow. The addendum, a document his own lawyers had dismissed as sentimental fluff to appease her family, a clause about gross reputational negligence that he had laughed at. Iris would never leave him. She was quiet, pliable academic. She abhorred conflict. The idea of her weaponizing their marriage contract was as ludicrous as her suddenly deciding to become a cage fighter. Except the cage fighter had just landed a knockout punch. He was locked out. Out of his suite, out of his marriage, and now out of his own company. The company he had built from a single algorithm in his college dorm room. The empire he had forged with his own sweat and genius. The shock was so profound, it left no room for anger, only a dizzying, terrifying vertigo. Meanwhile, Kaylin Vance was experiencing her own version of the fallout. Her moment of triumph had lasted approximately 3 hours. After Iris's post, the tide of public opinion had turned against her with biblical ferocity. She was no longer seen as the glamorous upgrade. She was the homewrecker, the cheap usurper. Her carefully curated comments section became a cesspool of snake emojis and vicious insults. "Did you really think you could take down a woman like Dr. Thorne?" one comment read. "She plays chess, you play checkers." Worse, her sponsors were getting spooked. The deal with Elysian Dynamics was, of course, dead. But now other brands, a luxury watch company, a high-end tequila, a wellness app were sending panicked emails. Their brand identity was built on aspirational positivity, not toxic marital warfare. An email from her agent was blunt. "They're invoking your morality clauses, Kaylin. You're radioactive right now. You need to fix this." Kaylin, a creature of public perception, was in full-blown crisis mode. "You have to do something," she shrieked at Seb, pacing the hotel room. Her face, usually a smooth canvas of confidence, was blotchy and tear-streaked. "You told me she would just go away quietly. You told me she was weak." "I thought she was," Seb muttered, staring at his phone at the Bloomberg headline that felt like an obituary for his career. He had profoundly, catastrophically misjudged the woman he had been married to for 7 years. He had seen her quietness as passivity hot as observation. He saw her intelligence as a charming accessory, not a weapon. His attempt to fix it was a disaster. He reactivated his phone and tried to launch a counter-offensive. He called board members, but they were in a meeting. He called investors, but they were traveling. He called his father-in-law Harrison Thorne, a man he had always secretly feared. Harrison picked up on the first ring. "Sterling." Harrison's voice was as cold and sharp as a shard of ice. "You have 60 seconds. Harrison, this is a misunderstanding. A private matter. You made it a public matter when you posted a photograph of your whore on the internet." Harrison cut in the word whore, delivered with surgical precision. "You embarrassed my daughter. You threatened the stability of my family's investment. This is no longer a private matter. This is a business transaction. And you, my boy, are a bad investment we are currently liquidating." The line went dead. Desperate Seb turned to the only tool he had left: public relations. He hired a high-powered crisis management firm, the kind that cleans up after oil spills and political scandals. Their advice was swift and brutal. He had to show contrition. He had to look like the penitent husband, and Kaylin had to disappear. The result was a public statement posted to his Instagram, deleting the infamous yacht photo. It was a masterpiece of corporate apology, full of phrases like, "a severe lapse in judgment," "deeply regret the pain I have caused," and "my family is my utmost priority." It begged for privacy as he worked to heal the wounds I have inflicted. It was the equivalent of throwing a teacup of water on a raging forest fire. The public saw it for what it was, a desperate, lawyer-approved attempt at damage control. Aris, from her fortress in the Hudson Valley, saw the statement and almost laughed. It was so predictable, so weak. She was surrounded by her own war counsel, Chloe, who had flown in from London on a red-eye, Marcus, who provided real-time updates from the corporate front, and her father, who was systematically dismantling Seb's financial and social standing with the quiet ruthlessness of a master strategist. "He's pleading for privacy," Chloe said, scrolling through reactions on her laptop. "The man who live-streamed his own affair is now asking for privacy. The audacity is breathtaking." "It's a move of desperation," Marcus added. "The suspension holds. The internal investigation has begun. We are auditing every expense account, every contract he signed in the last 2 years. We're going to find where he hid the money he spent on her." But Aris knew this was just the beginning. Seb was a cornered animal, and a cornered animal is at its most dangerous. She was waiting for his next move, knowing it would be more personal, more desperate. The move came 2 days later, and it was a twist even Aris hadn't anticipated. It arrived not via the internet, but via a legal courier. It was a petition filed in the family court of New York. Sebastian Sterling was suing for immediate emergency custody of their unborn child. The legal argument was as audacious as it was vile. It claimed that Dr. Aris Thorne's manipulative and emotionally erratic behavior, evidenced by her inflammatory social media post, proved she was an unstable environment for a child. It painted her as a vengeful woman using her pregnancy as a tool for extortion. It even included a sworn affidavit from a concerned third party, Kaylin Vance, who testified that Seb had expressed fears for his child's well-being in the hands of his unpredictable wife. He was trying to take her legacy away from her before it was even born. Chloe read the document, her expression turning from professional outrage to cold fury. "He's not just trying to win. He's trying to annihilate you. He's using the baby as a hostage." This was the blow that finally broke through Aris's icy composure. The thought of Seb of Kaylin having any claim, any power over her child was a violation so profound it made her physically ill. For the first time since she saw the photo, tears welled in her eyes, hot tears of rage and fear. But as she looked at the faces of her family around the grand mahogany table of her father's study, the fear subsided, replaced once again by that diamond-hard resolve. They had expected him to fight for his company. They hadn't expected him to stoop this low. "He doesn't want the baby," Aris said, her voice trembling but firm. "He wants leverage. He thinks this will force me to the negotiating table. He wants me to give him back his company in exchange for my child." "And will you?" her father asked, his eyes searching hers. Aris looked down at the court, filing at the clinical, cruel words attempting to twist her strength into madness. She thought of Seb's whisper, "My legacy." He had no idea what that word truly meant. It wasn't just about bloodlines or inheritance. It was about what you leave behind, the impact you make on the world. His legacy was becoming one of reckless ego and public disgrace. Hers would be one of strength, dignity, and survival. "No," Aris said, her voice ringing with newfound clarity in the silent room. "I will not negotiate with a terrorist. He wants a war for our legacy. He'll get one. Chloe, call the court. Reject any and all settlement offers, and find everything you can on Kaylin Vance, not the influencer, the real person. There's always something. Find it. We're no longer just defending. We're attacking." The battle for Elysian dynamics was over. The war for the Thorne-Sterling legacy had just entered its bloodiest chapter. The war moved from the digital realm to the cold, unforgiving theater of the New York family court system. The initial hearing was held in a private, sealed courtroom, but the stink of the scandal clung to the proceedings. Seb, flanked by a team of aggressive lawyers, looked pale and haggard. The swagger was gone, replaced by a tense, resentful anger. He had been so used to winning, to shaping reality to his will, that this process, being judged, questioned, and constrained by rules he couldn't rewrite, was a special kind of hell for him. Aris, by contrast, was the picture of calm, formidable grace. Dressed in a simple but impeccably tailored navy blue dress, her pregnancy now a gentle, undeniable curve, she exuded an aura of maternal strength and quiet authority. She did not look at Seb. Her focus was entirely on the judge, a stern, experienced woman named Judge Althea Rodriguez. Seb's lawyer argued passionately, painting Aris as a vindictive, unstable woman who had weaponized her pregnancy in a corporate dispute. They presented her Instagram post as Exhibit A, evidence of her willingness to use her unborn child as a pawn in a public game. When it was Chloe's turn, she didn't just refute their claims, she systematically dismantled them. "Your Honor," Chloe began, her British accent crisp and precise. "Mr. Sterling's counsel would have you believe this is about a concerned father. It is not. It is about a disgraced CEO attempting to regain leverage. He filed this emergency petition only after he was suspended from his company for gross misconduct that has to date cost his shareholders over $200 million in valuation." She then addressed the Instagram post. Mr. Sterling's post was a public declaration of an extramarital affair designed to inflict maximum emotional distress on his pregnant wife. My client's response, Chloe paused, letting the words hang in the air, was a photograph of her child, a fact, a reality, a reminder of the legacy Mr. Sterling claimed to cherish before he decided to discard it. To call this an act of instability is not just absurd, it is a masterclass in gaslighting. But Chloe had saved her masterstroke for last. Mr. Sterling's petition relies heavily on an affidavit from a Ms. Kaylin Vance. He presents her as a credible witness. We would like to present the court with some information that calls Miss Vance's credibility, and indeed her entire identity, into question. Chloe produced a file. Kaylin Vance, as she is known, was born Kimberly Ann Finney of Gary, Indiana. Far from being the heiress she purports to be, Ms. Finney has a history of, shall we say, strategic relationships. More troubling, however, are her financials. For the past 6 months, Ms. Finney has been receiving regular substantial payments, not from a social media company, but from an offshore account. An account we have traced back to a holding company owned by none other than Roman Castellan. A shocked murmur went through Seb's legal team. Seb himself looked utterly bewildered. Judge Rodriguez leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "And who is Mr. Castellan?" "Roman Castellan, Your Honor," Chloe said, "is the CEO of Prometheus Robotics, Elysian Dynamics, chief competitor. It appears Mr. Sterling's queen was not a love interest. She was a corporate spy, hired to orchestrate a scandal that would destabilize Elysian Tanket's stock and trigger the morality clause, paving the way for a hostile takeover by Prometheus." The revelation landed like a bomb in the silent courtroom. Seb stared open-mouthed first at Chloe, then at his own lawyers, a look of dawning, horrified comprehension on his face. He had been played, not just by Kaylin, but by his greatest rival. The affair wasn't a whirlwind romance. It was an act of industrial espionage. The yacht, the photo, the public declaration, it was all a meticulously staged performance, and he had been its star fool. His ego, his carelessness, his desire for a younger, more adoring woman had made him the perfect mark. The custody hearing was immediately dismissed. Judge Rodriguez looked at Seb with undisguised contempt. "Mr. Sterling, you have wasted this court's time with a frivolous and malicious petition. You have attempted to use your unborn child as a bargaining chip in a corporate game. You have already lost. This court's only concern is the well-being of that child, and it is abundantly clear that lies with its mother. Petition denied. I do not want to see you in my courtroom again." Seb stumbled out of the courthouse, a broken man. The press, who had been tipped off by an anonymous source, were waiting. The questions they hurled at him were no longer about his affair, but about his incompetence, his gullibility, his connection to Roman Castellan. The myth of Sebastian Sterling. The genius was dead and buried. 2 weeks later, the reckoning was complete. The Elysian Dynamics internal investigation, armed with Chloe's revelations, uncovered the full extent of Seb's recklessness and Kaelin's infiltration. Faced with irrefutable evidence, the board led by Marcus Thorne permanently removed Seb as CEO. In a move that shocked the financial world, the board didn't look for an outside replacement. They appointed an interim CEO to handle day-to-day operations, but created a new position, Chief Strategy and Vision Officer. This role, which would guide the company's long-term future and ethical development, was given to the one person who had proven she understood the true meaning of legacy doctor Aris Thorne. She would assume the role after her maternity leave. Kaelin Vance, exposed as Kimberly Ann Finney, disappeared. Her social media was deleted, her sponsorships evaporated, and she faced a slew of lawsuits from Elysian Dynamics. She became a footnote, a cautionary tale about the fleeting nature of digital fame. Seb, stripped of his title, his reputation and his voting shares, was forced to sell his remaining stock back to the company at a severely reduced price to avoid further legal action. He was left with a fortune, but he was a pariah. He had lost his company, his wife, his social standing, and the respect of the world. 4 months later, Aris gave birth to a healthy baby girl. She named her Athena. One crisp autumn afternoon, Aris was sitting in the gardens of the Hudson Valley estate, rocking Athena's bassinet. The baby was a perfect blend of her parents, with Aris's calm, observant eyes and a shock of dark hair that hinted at Seb. Aris felt a pang, not of love for the man he was, but of sorrow for the man he could have been. A car crunched on the gravel driveway. It was Seb. He looked older, thinner. He stood awkwardly at the edge of the lawn, a man who no longer knew his place in the world. "Aris," he said, his voice quiet, stripped of its usual confidence. "They told me I could find you here." She didn't answer, just watched him, her expression unreadable. "I came to see her," he said, his eyes fixed on the bassinet. If that's all right." Aris looked down at her daughter, sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the storm she had been born from. She thought about vengeance, about slamming the door in his face, about telling him he had forfeited this right forever. But then she looked at Athena's innocent face, and she knew her legacy couldn't be built on a foundation of hatred. Her legacy was about building a better future, and that future, for better or worse, included the fact of who her father was. "You can see her," Aris said, her voice even, "but you will not hold her. Not yet. You have to earn that. You don't get to be a father just because you share her DA, Seb. You have to show up. You have to be reliable. You have to be honest. You have to be better. Maybe one day you'll be worthy of her. Seb nodded, a flicker of something gratitude-shame, hope in his eyes. He took a few hesitant steps forward and peered into the bassinet. He stared at his daughter, at his legacy, for a long, silent moment. For the first time, he seemed to understand. It wasn't an empo or a stock price or a headline. It was this tiny, perfect sleeping child. A child whose future was now firmly in the hands of the queen he had tried and failed to dethrone. He had lost his kingdom, but he had just been given a chance, however small, at redemption, and for now that would have to be enough. And so the empire built on tea and charisma fell not to a market crash or a corporate rival, but to the quiet, unyielding strength of a woman who was pushed too far. Aris Thorne didn't just win a divorce. She reclaimed her narrative, protected her child, and redefined a legacy. She proved that in a world of curated lies and public betrayals, the most powerful weapon is often the undeniable, unvarnished truth. Sebastian Sterling wanted a queen, but he failed to recognize the one he already had, and in the end, he lost everything to the very legacy he so desperately wanted to create. What did you think of Aris's incredible strategy? Was Seb a villain or a fool who got played by everyone? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. This story is a powerful reminder that strength isn't always loud. If you were moved by Aris's journey, don't forget to hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more stories of epic drama and ultimate triumph. Click that notification bell so you never miss an update.